The waitress noticed his tattoo and said, "My father had the same one." The Mafia boss froze. "Hello everyone, before we begin today, story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us to bring more dramatic stories. Where are you watching from? Comment your country or city in the comments. Now let's get back to our main character. The scent of stale coffee and disinfectant clung to the air in the diner, a perfume Alara had come to associate with exhaustion. Each scrape of a chair, each clatter of a fork against a plate, grated on her frayed nerves. It was after midnight, the hour when the city's ghosts came out to eat, and she was running on fumes, and the sheer desperate need for the tip money crumpled in her apron pocket. That money was the only thing standing between her brother, Leo, and the indifferent cruelty of a public ward. At 19, she had perfected the art of compartmentalizing fear, tucking it away behind a practiced smile and a quick refill. But tonight, the fear was a physical thing, a cold knot in her stomach that the diner's greasy warmth couldn't touch. The bell above the door chimed, a dissonant note in the quiet hum of the room. She didn't look up. Eye contact was a currency she couldn't afford to spend with the late-night clientele. But a sudden, profound silence fell over the handful of patrons. The low murmur of conversation ceased. A fork, halfway to a trucker's mouth, froze in midair. The silence was heavy, charged, a living entity that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. She finally lifted her gaze. He stood in the doorway, framed by the rain-slicked darkness of the street, and it felt as if the entire city had just tilted on its axis. He wasn't just a customer, he was an event. Dressed in a black suit that was likely worth more than the diner itself, he moved with an unnerving stillness, a predator's economy of motion. His face was a collection of sharp angles and brutal beauty, dark hair swept back from a brow that had never known uncertainty. But it was his eyes that stole the air from her lungs, a pale, chilling gray that seemed to absorb all the light in the room and reflect nothing back. Within seconds, the diner began to empty. Not in a panic, but in a quiet, deferential exodus. Men twice his size averted their eyes, dropped cash on their tables, and slipped out into the night. Only Alara remained, trapped behind the counter, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. He chose a booth in the far corner, a throne of worn vinyl in the shadows. Alara grabbed a menu, her fingers trembling so badly she could barely hold it. "Welcome to the Night Owl," she managed, her voice a thin, reedy thing. "What can I get for you?" He didn't look at the menu. Those glacial eyes were fixed on her, a gaze that felt like a physical weight, pinning her in place. Black coffee. His voice was a low gravel, laced with an accent she couldn't place, something old and cold, and quiet. She fled to the coffee machine, her hands shaking as she poured the dark liquid into a thick ceramic mug. When she placed it on his table, his hand emerged from his sleeve to take it. And that's when her world stopped. Not because of his touch, though his fingers brushed hers, sending an electric jolt through her system. It was the tattoo. Curled around his right wrist, partially hidden by the cuff of his immaculate shirt, was a serpent eating its own tail. An Ouroboros. It wasn't just any Ouroboros. She'd seen dozens in books and online. This one was unique. The scales were intricately detailed, except for a tiny, almost invisible section where the pattern was deliberately broken, as if the artist had made a single, precise flaw. Impossible. She had seen that exact tattoo her entire life. A faded greenish version of it on the wrist of her father, a quiet, gentle librarian who had died 5 years ago, leaving her and Leo with nothing but a mountain of books and whispered memories. The words tumbled out of her mouth before she could stop them, a reckless, foolish whisper. "My father had the same one." Caden Volkov froze. The casual, predatory grace vanished, replaced by a terrifying stillness. He set the coffee cup down with a slow, deliberate motion that was more menacing than any sudden movement. His pale gray eyes lifted to hers, the dismissive assessment gone, replaced by a lethal, razor-sharp focus. "Say that again," he commanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that sliced through the diner's silence. Her survival instinct, the one she'd honed since she was 14 and their mother died, screamed at her to run, to apologize, to say she'd made a mistake. But the image of her father's gentle smile, the memory of that flawed serpent on his wrist as he turned the pages of a book for her, kept her rooted to the spot. "The tattoo," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "The serpent with the broken scale. My father had the exact same one." Something unreadable flickered across his face, a flash of something that looked almost like pain before it was buried under layers of ice. He looked down at the tattoo on his own wrist as if seeing it for the first time. "Impossible," he stated, the word a flat, hard stone. "This is the mark of my family. There is only one. There has ever only been one." "But there isn't," Alara insisted, a desperate edge to her voice. "I've seen it my whole life. I know it." "Then your father." Caden leaned forward, and the temperature in the booth seemed to plummet. "Was either a liar or a thief." The threat was no longer veiled. It hung in the air between them, thick and suffocating. "And in my family, we have very specific ways of dealing with thieves." He stood, pulling a $100 bill from a slim wallet and dropping it on the table, more than enough for 1,000 cups of coffee. His smile was a sharp, cruel slash in his handsome face. "Tell me your father's name." "Why?" The question was a gasp. "Because I will find out everything about him. And about you." He moved toward the door, a silent shadow of immense power. Alara found her voice, a fury born of love and grief erupting past her fear. "He wasn't a thief. He was a librarian. He was the kindest man I ever knew." Caden paused at the door, his back to her. He didn't turn, but his next words were a chilling promise that echoed in the empty diner long after the bell had chimed his departure. "We'll see. I will find you, little librarian's daughter, and you will tell me everything." Alara stood frozen, the $100 bill on the table feeling like a death warrant. Her simple, desperate observation had just set something catastrophic in motion, and she had a terrifying feeling that the ghosts who haunted the midnight hour were nothing compared to the one she had just served coffee to. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in psychological torment. Alara went home to their tiny two-bedroom apartment, the one with the persistent leak in the bathroom ceiling and the radiator that clanged like a trapped spirit. She checked on Leo, sleeping fitfully in the other room, his breathing a shallow whisper against the city's din. His medical chart was a litany of complex terms she had forced herself to understand, all of which boiled down to a simple, brutal fact. Without better care, the kind they couldn't possibly afford, he would not see his 16th birthday. She expected a black car to be waiting outside her building the next morning. It wasn't. She expected a knock on the door, a summons from the man with ice in his eyes. It never came. Instead, the world began to unravel around her, piece by piece, with a terrifying, surgical precision. Her landlord, a portly man who had always been content to accept her rent a few days late, suddenly appeared with an eviction notice. 3 months behind, he'd grumbled, refusing to meet her eye. It wasn't 3 months, it was 2 weeks. When she tried to argue, he just shrugged. "The building's been sold. New owners are cleaning house." It was a lie. She knew it. Then came the call from her boss at the diner. "Alara, I'm so sorry," he'd stammered, his voice thick with an emotion that sounded suspiciously like fear. We're downsizing. Your position has been eliminated." She was his only full-time waitress. The diner couldn't function without her. It was a phantom limb, Caden Volkov's power, amputating pieces of her life without ever showing its face. The final blow came in the form of a letter from the hospital. Leo's clinical trial, the one experimental treatment that had given them a sliver of hope, had been abruptly canceled. Funding issues, the form letter stated clinically. Ilara sat on her threadbare couch, the eviction notice, the termination call, and the hospital letter forming a trinity of despair. He was dismantling her life brick by brick, leaving her with nothing. No job, no home, no hope for her brother. He wasn't just hunting her, he was caging her, removing every possible escape route until the only path left led directly to him. The knock on the door, when it finally came, was almost a relief. She opened it without hesitation. Caden stood there, not in his severe black suit, but in dark jeans and a cashmere sweater that did nothing to soften the lethal aura that surrounded him. He wasn't flanked by henchmen. He was alone, which was somehow more terrifying. He looked past her, his gaze sweeping over the cramped, shabby apartment with a flicker of something she couldn't decipher. Disdain? Pity? "May I come in?" It wasn't a question. He stepped inside, and the small room seemed to shrink, the air growing thin and heavy. His eyes landed on a framed photograph on the bookshelf, the only one she had of her father. He picked it up. In the photo, a younger Ivan smiled, his eyes kind, the flawed Ouroboros tattoo just visible on his wrist as he held a much younger Ilara on his shoulders. "Ivan Morozov," Caden said, his voice flat. It wasn't a question. He knew. Of course, he knew. A librarian at the city's main branch for 20 years. Widowed, 2 children. A daughter, Ilara. A son, Leo. Currently at St. Jude's Public Hospital with a deteriorating heart condition. He set the photo down, his gaze locking with hers. "Is there anything I've missed?" "What do you want from me?" she whispered, her voice raw. "I want the truth about this," he said, tapping his own wrist. "And you're going to give it to me." "I told you, I don't know anything. It was just his tattoo." "A tattoo that doesn't exist anywhere but on the men of my bloodline," he countered, his voice dangerously soft. He took a step closer. "I don't like coincidences, Ilara, and I don't tolerate thieves." "He wasn't a thief," she repeated, her voice rising. "He was a good man." "Good men don't end up with a mark they have no right to," Caden said. He paused, letting the silence stretch, letting her desperation build. "Your brother," he said, changing tactics with a brutal deftness. "The doctors at St. Jude's are competent, but they are not the best. His condition requires a specialist, a surgeon in Switzerland. It requires a private facility, round-the-clock care, experimental gene therapy. It requires things you cannot give him." Ilara felt the floor give way beneath her. He had not only dissected her life, but he had also found its most vulnerable point and was now pressing down with surgical precision. "What are you saying?" "I'm offering you a deal," he said. He moved to the window, staring down at the gritty street below. "You come. With me. You will live in my home. You will answer my questions, every last one, until I am satisfied that I have the truth. In exchange." He turned back to her, his pale eyes pinning her in place. "Leo will be on a private jet to Zurich by morning. He will have the best doctors, the best treatments money can buy. I will pay for everything. His survival will be my responsibility." It was a gilded cage, offered as a lifeline, blackmail dressed up as salvation. He would save her brother's life, and in return, she would deliver herself into the hands of the monster who had systematically destroyed hers. "And if I say no?" she asked, the words tasting like ash. Caden's expression didn't change, but a chilling emptiness entered his eyes. "Then your new landlord will proceed with the eviction. The hospital will continue with its funding issues. And you will be a homeless, unemployed girl trying to care for a dying boy in a city that has no room for either of you." He let the horrific picture hang in the air. "The choice is yours, of course. It always is." She looked around the small apartment, at the peeling paint and the leaking ceiling, at the life she had fought so hard to hold together. And she thought of Leo, of his weak but hopeful smile, of the future she had promised him they would have together. There was no choice. There had never been a choice, not since the moment she'd spoken those fateful words in the diner. "I'll go," she whispered, the words a surrender, a sacrifice. Caden nodded once, a flicker of cold satisfaction in his eyes. "I knew you would. Loyalty is a trait I admire." He pulled out his phone and spoke a few words in a language she didn't understand. When he hung up, he looked at her. "An ambulance will be here in 20 minutes to transfer Leo to a private airfield. A car will be here for you in 5. Pack a small bag. You won't need much. Everything else will be provided for you." He turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Oh, and Alara," he added, his voice dropping to that intimate, menacing whisper. "Don't even think about running. There's nowhere on this earth you could go that I wouldn't find you. And the consequences for your brother would be regrettable." He closed the door behind him, leaving her in the ruins of her life, with nothing but the impossible choice he had already made for her. The penthouse was a silent, sterile world of glass and steel suspended high above the city. It was less a home than a museum, curated with minimalist furniture in shades of gray and black, vast empty spaces, and floor-to-ceiling windows that displayed the glittering skyline like a collection of captured stars. It was beautiful, cold, and utterly soulless. It was a perfect reflection of the man who owned it. Alara was given a suite of rooms, a bedroom, a sitting room, and a marble-clad bathroom that were larger than her entire apartment. A closet was already filled with clothes in her size, cashmere sweaters, silk blouses, tailored slacks, nothing she would have chosen for herself. Everything was in muted colors, elegant and anonymous. It was a costume for a role she had not auditioned for, the property of Caden Volkov. For the first week, he left her mostly alone. He was a phantom presence in the vast apartment, his movements silent, his schedule opaque. She would wake to find breakfast laid out for her on a tray. She would wander the cold, empty rooms, feeling like a ghost in someone else's afterlife. Her only contact with the outside world was a daily supervised phone call with Leo. His voice was stronger each time, filled with awe, as he described the private hospital room in Zurich that looked like a hotel suite, the kind doctors, the view of the Alps from his window. Each call was a fresh twist of the knife, a reminder of the price of his health. "They think they can fix it, Alara," he'd said during their last call, his voice brimming with a hope she hadn't heard in years. "They really think they can fix it." The gratitude she felt was a bitter, choking thing, inextricably bound to her resentment for the man who had made it possible. On the 8th day, Caden summoned her to his study. It was the one room in the penthouse that felt lived in, dominated by a massive mahogany desk and walls lined with books, not for decoration, but for reading. He was standing by the window when she entered, a tumbler of amber liquid in his hand. "Sit," he said, not turning around. She perched on the edge of a leather armchair that was impossibly soft. He finally turned to face her, his gray eyes sweeping over her, taking in the gray sweater and black pants he had bought for her. "I received a report from Dr. Alleman this morning," he said. "Leo's preliminary treatments are showing promising results. They are optimistic about the upcoming surgery." "Thank you," she said, the words feeling inadequate and tasting like poison. She hated being grateful to him. He waved a dismissive hand. "I keep my promises." He took a sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving her face. "Now it's your turn." He walked over to his desk and sat down, steepling his fingers. The picture of a king holding court. "Let's talk about your father, Ivan Morozov. Where was he from?" "I don't know," she answered honestly. "He never talked about his life before he came here, before he met my mother." "Convenient," Caden murmured. "And the tattoo? Did he ever speak of it? No, it was just there. A part of him, like the scar on his knuckle or the way he always smelled of old books. Caden leaned back, studying her. This tattoo is a brand, Alara. It is burned into the skin of every firstborn Volkov male when he comes of age. It signifies leadership, legacy, blood. It is not something a man acquires by accident. He leaned forward again, his voice dropping. My father gave it. To me on my 18th birthday. His father gave it to him. It has been this way for 5 generations. There is no record of a second one ever being made. So I ask you again, who was your father? I've told you what I know, she insisted, her frustration mounting. He was a librarian. He spent his days surrounded by dusty books and his nights reading to us. He couldn't have been a part of your world. He was too gentle. Gentleness is a luxury in my world, Caden said, his voice flat, and often it is a mask for weakness or deceit. He stood up and began to pace, his restless energy filling the room. You're hiding something, or he hid something from you. We will find out which it is. The days fell into a new routine. Each morning, Caden would question her, circling the same facts, probing for inconsistencies, for any scrap of information she might have forgotten. Each afternoon, she was left to her own devices, a prisoner in a sky-high palace. She began to explore. The books in his study were not just business texts. There were volumes of history, philosophy, classic literature in multiple languages. She found a section on Russian history, on the Bratva, the organized crime syndicates. She read about families, territories, codes of honor, and blood feuds. She was trying to understand the world that had claimed her, the world her father had supposedly been a part of. One afternoon, while Caden was out, she found a small, locked office adjoining his study. It was the only locked door in the penthouse. Her curiosity, a desperate need for any kind of leverage, gnawed at her. She searched his desk, her hands trembling, feeling like a thief. Tucked away in a back drawer, she found a small, antique-looking key. It fit the lock. The office was small and stark. A safe, a shredder, and a single filing cabinet. She tried the cabinet. It was unlocked. Inside were files, dozens of them, labeled with names. She pulled one out at random. Petrov. The file was filled with surveillance photos, financial records, a detailed family tree. She remembered the name from her reading. The Petrovs were a rival family, the Volkovs' most bitter enemies. She dug deeper, and then she found it. A thin file labeled simply Alexei. Inside was a single yellowed photograph. It showed 2 young men, teenagers, standing side by side, their arms slung around each other's shoulders. They were in what looked like an old-world courtyard. Both were shirtless, their chests proud, and on each of their right wrists was the Ouroboros tattoo. One of the young men was undeniably a younger version of Caden's father, Dmitri, whose portrait hung in the main hallway. The other boy had her father's eyes, her father's smile. It was him, young, vibrant, and alive, and standing next to the man who ran the Volkov crime family. Her breath hitched. Tucked behind the photograph was a folded, brittle piece of paper. It was a letter, written in Russian. She had learned the alphabet from her father, had a rudimentary understanding of the language. She slowly, painstakingly began to translate. My dearest Ivan, it began, using the name she knew. If you are reading this, it means I have failed, and Dmitri has won. But I need you to know the truth. You are not a traitor. You are a Volkov. You are my son. The letter was from her grandfather, a man she never knew existed. The truth it revealed was more shocking than anything she could have imagined. Her father's name hadn't been Ivan Morozov. It had been Alexei Volkov, Caden's uncle, the younger brother of the family patriarch Dmitri. The letter painted a damning picture. Dmitri was ruthless, ambitious, hungry for absolute power. Alexei was the opposite: thoughtful, honorable, a believer in the old codes that put family and loyalty above profit. He was the conscience of the family. The two Ouroboros tattoos were a symbol of their shared leadership, their bond. But Dmitri had created a subtle difference. The tattoo given to Alexei, the second son, had a single, intentionally broken scale, a flaw known only to the two of them and the artist. It was a mark of the second in command, a permanent reminder of his place. A rival family, the Petrovs, had ambushed them, a bloody, violent confrontation that had resulted in the death of Dmitri's wife, Caden's mother. Dmitri, consumed by grief and rage, had blamed Alexei. He'd claimed Alexei's softness, his honorable dealings, had been a weakness the Petrovs exploited. He'd branded his own brother a traitor, a liability, and had exiled him from the family, from the city, under penalty of death. Her father had fled, taken a new name, and spent the rest of his life hiding in plain sight as a humble librarian, terrified that his past would one day catch up to him, that his brother's monstrous lie would destroy the new family he had built. Alara sank to the floor, the letter clutched in her hand. Her entire life, her father's entire identity, had been a lie constructed to protect them. He wasn't a thief, he was a prince in exile, and the man holding her captive, the man who saw her as the daughter of a criminal, was her cousin. The son of the man who had destroyed her father's life. The weight of the secret, the decades of pain and betrayal settled over her. She now held the truth, a truth that could either save her or get her killed. And she had no idea what Caden would do when he found out. The sound of the front door opening echoed through the silent penthouse. Caden was home. Alara's blood ran cold. She scrambled to her feet, shoving the file back into the cabinet, locking the office door, and slipping the key back into the desk drawer just as Caden's footsteps grew closer. She met him in the hallway, schooling her features into a neutral mask, her heart pounding against her ribs. He looked at her, his gray eyes narrowed with suspicion. "You look pale. What have you been doing?" "Nothing," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Just reading." He studied her for a long moment, and she was certain he could hear the frantic beating of her heart, see the truth she was hiding behind her eyes. Then he seemed to accept her answer, turning away. "I have a meeting. We will continue our discussion about your father tonight." She watched him walk into his study and close the door. She was standing in the home of her father's greatest enemy, the man who had inherited an empire built on the ashes of her family's honor. She now knew the truth, but the truth was a dangerous weapon. In Caden's hands, it could be used to justify his father's actions, to brand her as the heir of a traitor, solidifying her status as his prisoner. Or just maybe, it could be the key to her freedom. She had to find a way to use it, to navigate the treacherous currents of this family's dark history without getting pulled under. Her father had lived his life in fear. She refused to do the same. For Leo, for herself, and for the gentle librarian who was secretly a prince, she would fight. She just had to figure out how to fight a monster without becoming one. That evening, Caden was a storm cloud of controlled violence. He paced his study, his movements tight, his jaw clenched. Something had happened in his meeting, something that had unsettled the unshakable calm he usually projected. Alara sat in the leather armchair, the file's contents burning in her memory, and waited. He finally stopped pacing and fixed her with an intense stare. "The Petrovs," he said, the name a curse on his lips. "They're making a move. After years of quiet, they're testing my borders, encroaching on my territory. They think a decade of peace has made us soft." He ran a hand through his dark hair, a rare sign of agitation. "They're using the old ways, the old grievances. They're spreading rumors that I've lost my father's strength, that I'm distracted." His eyes narrowed on her. "And you, Alara, are a very public distraction." The implication was clear. Her presence was being seen as a weakness, a chink in his armor. This was her chance. She took a deep breath. Perhaps they're not the only ones who have misunderstood the past, she said, her voice calm and even. Caden's head snapped toward her. What is that supposed to mean? I know who my father was, she said, rising from the chair to face him. She would not deliver this news from a position of submission. His name was Alexei Volkov. He was your father's brother. He was your uncle. The silence that followed was absolute. Caden stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief, his pale eyes searching hers for any sign of deceit. For a long moment he said nothing, the only sound in the room the faint hum of the city far below. Then he laughed. It was not a sound of humor, but a cold, harsh bark of derision. My uncle was a traitor, he spat. He betrayed our family, caused my mother's death, and was cast out. My father told me he died in exile years ago, a pathetic, broken man. You expect me to believe your bookish little librarian was a Volkov prince? It's a desperate, pathetic lie. It's the truth, Alara insisted, her voice gaining strength. She walked over to the locked office door. The key is in the top right drawer of your desk. Open it. A flicker of surprise crossed his face that she knew about the key, about the office. He hesitated, then strode to the desk, retrieved the key, and unlocked the door. He disappeared inside. She heard the scrape of the filing cabinet drawer, the rustle of papers. He emerged moments later, the file labeled Alexei in one hand, the photograph of the two young men in the other. He stared at the picture, his gaze fixed on the smiling boy who had her father's eyes. This proves nothing, he said, his voice tight. A resemblance. Look at the tattoos, Caden, she urged. Look closely. He held the photograph under the desk lamp, his eyes scanning the faded ink on the two boys' wrists. He looked from the picture to his own wrist and back again. She could see the exact moment the truth dawned on him, the subtle, almost imperceptible shift in his expression as he recognized the tiny, deliberate flaw in the serpent's scales on the boy in the photo, a flaw that was absent from his own tattoo, a flaw that branded the boy as the second son. How? He whispered, the single word filled with a universe of confusion and dawning horror. Your father lied to you, she said softly, stepping closer. He lied to everyone. My father wasn't a traitor. He was a scapegoat. Your father exiled him to consolidate his own power, to turn your family's grief into a weapon he could use to control you. Caden sank into his desk chair, the photograph still clutched in his hand. His entire world, the bedrock of his identity, the story of the heroic father, the traitorous uncle, the righteous quest for vengeance, was crumbling around him. My mother, he began, his voice rough. He told me Alexei's weakness got her killed. He told you what he needed you to believe, Alara said. He turned you into his perfect soldier, fueled by a lie. She watched him, seeing not the terrifying Mafia boss, but a man grappling with a lifetime of deception. For the first time, she saw a crack in the icy facade, a glimpse of the boy who had lost his mother and been fed a poison of hatred in its place. The revelation did not bring her the satisfaction she had expected. Instead, she felt a strange, unwelcome pang of sympathy. At that moment, the intercom on his desk buzzed. Caden ignored it. It buzzed again, more insistently. He finally pressed the button, his voice a low growl. What is it? Sir, a frantic voice came through the speaker. It's the hospital in Zurich. There's been a security breach. 2 men trying to gain access to Leo Morozov's room. They've been apprehended, but they mentioned the Petrov name. Caden was on his feet in an instant, the grief and confusion on his face replaced by a familiar mask of cold, lethal fury. But this time, his fury was not directed at her. The Petrovs knew. They knew about Leo. They knew about her. They were no longer just a business threat. They had made it personal. They had targeted a sick child. They had targeted his family. his blood. "Get Dr. Alleman on the line now," Caden commanded into the intercom, "and double the security detail. No one gets in or out of that wing without my direct authorization." He turned to Alara, and his eyes held a new, terrifying emotion. It wasn't the cold possessiveness of a captor, but the desperate primal fear of a protector. "They're not just testing my borders anymore," he said, his voice grim. "They're hunting my bloodline, and you, Alara, and your brother are now the most vulnerable targets they have." The gilded cage had just become a fortress, and the man she had seen as her jailer had, in the space of a single heartbeat, become her only shield against a threat far greater than she could have ever imagined. The shift in Caden was immediate and absolute. The simmering animosity he'd held for her, the cold suspicion, evaporated, replaced by a fierce, hyper-focused protectiveness that was somehow more unnerving than his previous hostility. He was no longer her interrogator, he was her guardian, and the intensity he brought to the role was suffocating. Leo was moved to an even more secure, undisclosed location, a private clinic nestled in the Swiss mountains, guarded by a team of Caden's most trusted men. Alara's supervised calls became video chats, where she could see for herself that Leo was safe, blissfully unaware of the danger swirling around him. The penthouse became a command center. Men in dark suits came and went at all hours, their faces grim, their conversations clipped and coded. Alara was confined to her suite, a prisoner for her own safety. The irony was not lost on her. She had traded one cage for another, albeit one where the jailer now looked at her with a complicated mixture of guilt, responsibility, and something she couldn't yet name. A few days after the hospital incident, he came to her rooms. He didn't knock, simply entered, finding her curled up on the window seat, watching the rain lash against the glass. "We need to talk," he said, his voice quiet. He didn't sit, but stood across the room, creating a respectful distance she hadn't expected. "My father," he began, the words sounding difficult. "I confronted him." "And?" she asked, her heart rate quickening. He admitted it. All of it. Caden's face was a stone mask, but his eyes were haunted. "He said Alexei was soft, that his honor was a liability in our world. He said my mother's death, that it was a necessary sacrifice to forge me into the leader he needed me to be, to teach me that mercy is a weakness we cannot afford. The casual cruelty of it, the monstrous calculus of a father sacrificing his wife and brother to mold his son, left Alara speechless. He feels no remorse," Caden continued, his voice barely a whisper. "He sees you and Leo not as family, but as a loose end, a threat to the legacy he built on a lie." "What are you going to do?" she asked. "He is my father." The words were heavy with the weight of a lifetime of conflicted loyalty. "But he is not the man I thought he was. And you are my blood, my responsibility." He finally looked at her, and the vulnerability in his gaze was a raw, open wound. "I have spent my life avenging a ghost, hating a man who was innocent. I have built my entire world on a foundation of lies. And now, the only person I can trust to see the truth is you." The confession hung in the air between them, a fragile bridge across a chasm of pain and betrayal. He, the powerful, untouchable Caden Volkov, was adrift, and he was looking to her, the waitress, the librarian's daughter, for an anchor. "What did my father know?" he asked, his voice regaining some of its command. "He lived in fear his whole life. He must have prepared for the possibility of being found. What did he leave behind? What secrets did he know that could help us now?" Alara thought of the locked box she had never opened, the one her father had told her to keep safe, to open only in the direst of circumstances. It was in a storage unit across town, a place Caden's men had likely missed in their initial sweep of her life. "There's a box," she said slowly. "His personal things. He told me it was insurance." Caden's eyes lit with a spark of renewed purpose. Where? Within the hour, two of his most trusted men had retrieved the box. It was a simple wooden chest, old and worn. Caden placed it on the large table in the sitting room, and they looked at it, a silent testament to a life lived in the shadows. Alara had the key, a small, ornate thing she wore on a chain around her neck, hidden under her shirt. She unlocked the chest. Inside, nestled amongst old books and faded photographs, were several leather-bound journals. Her father's neat, scholarly handwriting filled the pages. But it wasn't a diary. It was a meticulously detailed ledger. For years, Alexei Volkov, the gentle librarian, had been secretly tracking his brother's empire. He had documented illicit shipments, laundered money, and political bribes. And most damningly, he had recorded the details of the Petrov family's rise to power. The journals revealed that the Petrovs' entire empire had been built on a lie of their own. Their initial wealth, the seed from which their criminal organization had grown, had come from assets stolen from the Volkovs during the chaos of the ambush that had killed Caden's mother. An ambush, the journal suggested, that might have been aided by a traitor within the Volkov family itself, someone loyal to Dmitri. It was a bombshell, a secret that, if revealed, would not only disgrace the Petrovs but would shatter their alliances and crumble their power base. It was the weapon Alexei had prepared but never had the chance to use. He was never weak, Caden murmured, his voice filled with a new, profound respect as he looked at the open journal. He was patient. He was waiting. He looked at Alara, and for the first time she felt like an equal, a partner. He gave us the key to dismantling both our enemies, the Petrovs and the rot within my own family. But the journal contained one more secret. Tucked into a hidden compartment in the lid of the box was another letter addressed to her. My dearest Alara, it read, if you are reading this, then the world has found you and I am gone. Know that every day of my quiet life was a gift, because I had you and Leo. There is one last thing you must know. The flaw in my tattoo, the broken scale, was not just a mark of the second son. It was a key, a symbol our grandfather created. He always feared Dmitri's ambition. Find the serpent with the broken scale, and you will find the family's true legacy, not its fortune, but its history, its honor. Alara read the words aloud. Caden's brow furrowed in confusion. The serpent with the broken scale? What does that mean? They both looked at the journals, at the photographs, searching for a clue. Then Alara's eyes widened. She remembered something from the books in Caden's own study, a history of the city's founding families. There was a chapter on the Volkovs, with a picture of their ancestral estate on the coast, a place that had been abandoned for decades. The photo showed ornate iron gates at the entrance, and forged into the center of the gates was a massive Ouroboros. The estate, she whispered. The gates. Caden understood instantly. It was a long shot, a riddle from a dead man, but it was the only lead they had. Leaving the penthouse was a risk, but staying while their enemies gathered was a greater one. Under the cover of darkness, with a small, elite team, they drove out of the city, leaving the glittering cage behind for the crumbling ruins of the Volkov family's past. The estate was a skeleton on a windswept cliff, beautiful and desolate. The iron gates were rusted, chained shut, but the massive Ouroboros was still there. And as they approached with flashlights, they saw it. In the intricate ironwork of the serpent's scales, one single scale was broken. Caden reached out and pressed it. With a groan of rusted metal, a hidden panel in the stone gatepost slid open, revealing a small, dark cavity. Inside was a metal box. Caden lifted it out, his movements reverent. Inside, protected from the elements, was another ledger, older than the others. It was their grandfather's. It contained not only the truth about Dmitri's treachery, but also proof. irrefutable proof in the form of signed documents and correspondence that the Petrov patriarch had been in collusion with Dmitri from the beginning. They had orchestrated the ambush together. Dmitri got rid of his honorable brother and gained absolute power. The Petrovs got the seed money to build their empire. Kadin's mother hadn't been a necessary sacrifice. She had been collateral damage in a monstrous betrayal. The truth was worse than either of them could have imagined. As Kadin stared at the damning proof in his hands, Alara saw the last of the boy he might have been die, and the man he had to become be born. He closed the ledger, his face set like granite. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that seemed to echo the crashing waves below. "We take back our family's honor. We end this, for my mother and for your father." As they stood on that cliff, united by a shared tragic history, a new, unspoken bond formed between them. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something powerful, a fragile alliance forged in secrets and lies, and a shared desire for a justice that was decades overdue. The drive back to the city was a silent, charged affair. The weight of the grandfather's ledger on the seat between them was heavier than any weapon. It was the truth, a truth that would either liberate them or ignite a war that could consume them all. Kadin was a different man. The restless energy was gone, replaced by a preternatural calm, the stillness of a storm's eye. He was no longer just reacting, he was planning, his mind working with a terrifying clarity. Alara watched him, a strange mix of fear and admiration churning within her. She saw the man her father must have seen in his brother, the potential for greatness twisted by a poisoned legacy. Back in the penthouse, he didn't relegate her to her rooms. He led her to the study, spread the ledgers across his desk, and said, "Tell me about him. About my uncle. I need to understand the man he was, not the ghost my father created." For hours, Alara talked. She told Kadin about her father's love for poetry, his quiet patience, his unwavering belief in the good of people, even when the world had given him every reason to believe otherwise. She described his hands, stained with ink and smelling of paper, not blood. As she spoke, she saw Kadin piecing together an image of the uncle he never knew, and in doing so, rediscovering a part of himself he had long since buried. "He wouldn't have wanted a war," she said finally. "He would have wanted justice, but not at the cost of more innocent lives." Kadin nodded slowly, his gaze distant. "My father taught me that power is taken by force. Your father, Alexei, he understood that true power lies in the truth." He looked at the ledgers. "This is not a declaration of war. It is a death sentence. But it must be delivered with the precision of a surgeon, not the blunt force of a sledgehammer." His plan began to take shape. It was audacious, dangerous, and brilliant. He would not confront the Petrovs on the streets. He would dismantle them from within, using their own greed and paranoia against them. The next day, carefully selected pages from Alexei's journals, detailing minor Petrov betrayals against their own allies, began to anonymously surface within the city's criminal underworld. A seed of doubt expertly planted. Then Kadin called a meeting, not of his own men, but of the other ruling families, the ones who had alliances with the Petrovs. He presented them not with his grandfather's ledger, but with a carefully curated selection of evidence from Alexei's journals, proof that the Petrovs had been cheating them for years, skimming profits, and breaking codes. He destabilized their foundation of trust. The final piece of his plan involved his own father. Kadin went to Dmitri, not with accusations, but with a chillingly calm presentation of the facts. He laid the grandfather's ledger on the table between them. Dmitri, old and frail but still possessing eyes like chips of ice, read the damning pages. He saw the proof of his collusion with the Petrovs, the betrayal that had cost him his wife and brother. He saw that his entire life's work, the legacy he had built for his son, was based on a lie that was about to be exposed. Caden offered him a choice. He could face the wrath of the other families and the ruin of their name, or he could quietly cede all remaining influence, retire to a secluded estate, and spend the rest of his days in silent exile, just as his brother had. For the first time in his life, Dmitry Volkov was defeated. He chose silence. With Dmitry neutralized and the Petrovs' alliances crumbling, Caden made his final move. He leaked the full contents of his grandfather's ledger to one person, the Petrov Patriarch's ambitious, ruthless second-in-command, a man known to be frustrated with his boss's increasingly erratic leadership. He gave him the weapon to overthrow his own family, knowing the ensuing internal conflict would cripple the Petrov organization for a generation. It was a masterstroke of strategy, a war won without a single shot fired in the streets. It was a victory Alexei would have been proud of. In the quiet aftermath, as the city's underworld reeled and realigned, the penthouse felt different. The oppressive tension had lifted, replaced by a quiet, uncertain peace. Alara found Caden on the balcony, staring out at the skyline. "It's done," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of the past week. "My father is gone. The Petrovs are tearing themselves apart. We're safe." "Is it ever truly done?" she asked softly. He turned to her, and in the cool light of dawn, his gray eyes were clear, free of the ghosts that had haunted them. "No," he admitted. "But what comes next? We build it on the truth." He stepped closer, his usual intimidating presence softened by a new, raw vulnerability. "Alara, my entire life has been a lie. The only true thing in it right now is you. The loyalty you have for your brother, the courage you showed when you stood up to me, the grace you've shown me even after I—" He didn't finish. He didn't have to. "I owe you a debt that can never be repaid. I destroyed your life, and I have endangered you and your brother." He took a deep breath. "I am giving you a choice, a real one this time. I have set up a trust for you and Leo, enough money to last 100 lifetimes. I will arrange new identities, a new life for you both, anywhere in the world you want to go. You can be free of me, of this name, of all of it. You will never have to see me again." He laid her freedom at her feet, a genuine, no-strings-attached offering. The gilded cage was open. She could fly away and never look back. She could have the quiet, safe life she had always craved. She looked at him, at this complicated, broken, and beautiful man who was trying to piece himself back together from the wreckage of his past. She thought of their shared history, the blood that ran in both their veins, the strange, intimate bond forged in a crucible of danger and discovery. Leaving would be the smart choice, the safe choice. But since when had she ever made the smart choice? "What if I don't want to go?" she asked, her voice a whisper. Hope, bright and terrifying, flared in his eyes. "Alara?" "You said we build what comes next on the truth," she said, stepping closer, closing the distance between them. "The truth is, this is my family's legacy too. My father was a Volkov. That makes me one. I don't want to run from it anymore." She reached out and placed her hand on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. "And the other truth is, I think I'm falling in love with the man who is trying to honor him." He covered her hand with his touch gentle, reverent. A single tear traced a path down his cheek, a startling sign of the emotion he had held in check for so long. "Stay," he breathed, the word a prayer. "Stay and build it with me." She rose on her toes and kissed him. It was not a kiss of passion, but of acceptance, of promise, of two broken pieces of a fractured family finally coming together to make a new, stronger whole. The penthouse was no longer a cage or a fortress. It was becoming a home. And as the sun rose over the city, painting the sky in shades of hope, Alara knew that her father had not just left her a secret. He had left her a legacy, a family, and a love she never expected to find. The phoenix had risen, and this time it would never fall again.